The story begins in 1996 at Central High School, where a heavy-set teenager named Robbie Weirdage was in the locker room taking a shower. Several students spotted him and decided to pull a cruel prank. Meanwhile, in the school's basketball court, the entire student body was gathered for a farewell ceremony. The star of the event was Calvin Joyner, a popular student recognized for his outstanding achievements. Calvin took the stage and delivered an energetic, motivational speech that had the crowd cheering. But in the middle of it, the doors suddenly burst open. Led by a student named Trevor Olson, a group of boys carried Robbie's naked body and slid him across the slippery basketball court floor. The entire crowd erupted into laughter, mocking him. Everyone laughed, except Calvin, who stepped forward, removed his jacket, and draped it over Robbie to cover him. Humiliated beyond words, Robbie fled the scene. Fast forward 20 years later, in 2016, Calvin is now married to his high school sweetheart, Maggie, and works as an accountant at a well-known firm. One day at work, he receives an online notification about his upcoming high school reunion. Almost at the same time, he gets a Facebook friend request from someone named Bob Stone. Curious, Calvin accepts and is shocked when Bob sends a message revealing that he is actually Robbie Weirdage from high school. Bob invites Calvin to meet him at a bar that evening. When they meet, Calvin is stunned. Gone is the overweight teenager he remembered. Bob is now tall, muscular, and built like a professional athlete. They catch up over drinks, but when an argument breaks out at the bar, Bob reveals another change. He's now a skilled martial artist, easily fending off troublemakers. Later, Bob asks if he can crash at Calvin's place for the night. Being the good guy he is, Calvin agrees. At Calvin's home, Bob requests his help in reviewing some online transactions. Together, they uncover shady auctions and offers for bank accounts holding millions of dollars, destined for the mafia and other dangerous criminal groups. The bidding ends in 14 hours. When Calvin's laptop freezes, he questions Bob about the auction site. Bob's answers are vague and evasive, raising suspicion. Eventually, Bob settles in to sleep on the couch for the night. The next morning, as Calvin is preparing to leave for work, there's a knock at the door. He opens it to find a group of CIA agents, led by Agent Pamela Harris. They inform Calvin they're looking for a fugitive named Bob Stone. Surprised, Calvin admits Bob is inside. But when the agents enter, Bob is nowhere to be found, and the room looks untouched. Agent Harris explains that Bob is indeed a CIA agent, but a rogue one. He is accused of stealing classified information about the auction site and trying to sell it to the mafia, as well as killing his partner, Phil, during the mission. Shocked, Calvin decides to cooperate with the CIA. Harris lays out a plan to use Calvin as bait to lure Bob out. The trap is set at Calvin's office. Sure enough, Bob calls Calvin and asks to meet downstairs. The moment he does, the CIA rushes in to make the arrest. It turned out everything was part of Bob's plan. After the CIA agents left Calvin alone in his office, Bob suddenly appeared, insisting he needed Calvin's help. But Calvin, convinced that Bob was dangerous, refused and quickly alerted the CIA. A firefight broke out between Bob and the agents. Bullets flew, chaos erupted, until Bob and Calvin managed to escape together. Once they were clear, Bob pleaded his case. He swore he wasn't a traitor. His real mission was to catch a ruthless criminal known as the Black Badger, the man responsible for murdering his partner, Phil. Bob believed the Black Badger possessed a satellite code capable of unlocking millions of dollars in secret accounts. The code was going up for sale to the highest bidder, and Bob needed Calvin's accounting skills to track the transaction. While on the road, they stopped to remove the GPS tracker hidden in their car. But before they could finish, a bounty hunter ambushed them. Bob was taken down and paralyzed by a stun weapon, while Calvin escaped on a motorcycle. As Calvin sped toward his home, Agent Pamela Harris intercepted him. She confirmed that Bob was indeed a CIA agent, but claimed he'd gone rogue. In her eyes, Bob was the Black Badger. She warned Calvin not to tell his wife anything for their own safety. She also handed him a tracking device linked to the CIA system, telling him to press it if Bob showed up again. Later, Calvin attended a marriage counseling session with Maggie, only to discover their consultant was none other than Bob in disguise. After a round of fake therapy, Bob once again tried to convince Calvin to help him. Eventually, Calvin agreed to set up a meeting with Trevor Olson, their old classmate who now worked at an international financial firm. Olson's company had the ability to track overseas bank transactions, which could pinpoint where the Black Badger's deal was taking place. Olson, who used to humiliate Robbie in high school, wasn't intimidated even when faced with the transformed, muscle-bound Bob. After the meeting, Agent Harris contacted Calvin. This time, she threatened to arrest Maggie if Calvin failed to help her catch Bob. Trapped, Calvin betrayed Bob and revealed their location. The CIA swarmed in, captured Bob, and took him to a secret facility. Inside, Harris interrogated him about Phil's murder and the Black Badger's identity. When Bob refused to talk, she turned to torture, but even then, Bob stayed silent. Feeling guilty, Calvin decided to act. He helped Bob overpower several CIA agents and escape. Once free, Calvin input Olson's account and transaction codes into the CIA tracker and discovered the deal would happen in a Boston underground parking garage. The two stole a plane and flew straight to Boston. Upon arrival, Bob told Calvin to wait outside while he went in to meet the buyer alone. But moments later, Harris entered the garage. Calvin, convinced she was the real Black Badger, rushed in to warn Bob. Instead, Calvin stumbled into the meeting and completely derailed it. To protect their cover, Bob claimed to be the Black Badger, then shot Calvin, deliberately grazing his neck to avoid killing him. As Bob tried to salvage the deal, a familiar voice rang out. Phil stepped out of the shadows, alive, and with a smug grin, he revealed the truth. He was the real Black Badger, and his death had been nothing but an elaborate ruse. Calvin, still reeling from the gunshot wound, struggles to process what's happening. Who is the real Black Badger, Bob or Phil? Before he can decide, the chaos explodes as Agent Harris and a heavily armed CIA strike team storm in. Gunfire erupts, bullets tearing through the air. In the middle of the firefight, Calvin spots two flash drives, each containing the satellite code that both Bob and Phil are after, lying exposed on the ground. Dodging bullets, he dives in and manages to grab them. But the mob boss, the one who was ready to buy the code from Bob, sees this and immediately tears after Calvin in a car. Just as the mob boss is about to run him down, Bob comes flying in, yanking Calvin to safety and taking the mob boss out in one swift move. Calvin bolts, but Phil is right on his heels. Soon, Calvin finds himself trapped on a bridge, Bob on one side, Phil on the other. Phil tries to talk him down, insisting that Bob is the real traitor and demanding the codes. Bob, insulted by the accusation, opens fire on Phil, and the two men engage in a vicious shootout. Convinced Bob is the true villain, Calvin picks up a gun and fires at him. That's when Phil drops the act, smiling coldly as he reveals he is the real Black Badger. He quickly takes Calvin hostage, pressing a weapon to his head. Thinking fast, Calvin twists into a somersault to break free. The split-second distraction is all Bob needs. He launches forward, slicing Phil's throat with lightning speed before hurling him into the lake below. Bob turns to Calvin, apologizing for shooting him earlier. He explains it was the only way to keep the mob from killing him. Calvin, guilt in his voice, apologizes for doubting Bob and assuming the worst. The scene jumps to their grand entrance at the 20th high school reunion, arriving in style aboard a CIA helicopter. Agent Harris, now fully convinced of Bob's loyalty, apologizes for ever suspecting him and asks him to come back to the CIA. Calvin, meanwhile, reconciles with Maggie, promising to work on their marriage. During the reunion, Calvin pulls off one final surprise. He hacked the voting system to crown Bob Stone as prom king. At first, the crowd is baffled. Nobody knows who Bob Stone is until it's revealed he's actually Robbie Weirdicht, the awkward, overweight kid humiliated at the farewell assembly 20 years ago. Trevor Olson tries to recreate that humiliation, stepping forward to mock Bob again. But Bob isn't the same kid he used to be. He plants a solid punch squarely in Olson's face, shutting him up for good. Then, standing before the crowd, Bob delivers an uplifting speech about resilience, growth, and facing every obstacle head-on. He calls Calvin his true friend, the one who never laughed when the whole world did. To cap it all off, Bob reenacts that infamous moment from the past, this time stripping down completely by choice. But instead of laughter, the crowd gasps in admiration at his sculpted, athletic body. Spotting Darla, his high school crush, he asks her to dance. The film closes on Maggie, now pregnant, as Calvin has officially joined the CIA. On his first day, Bob pulls up in a brand new Chevrolet Silverado to pick him up. In a touching gesture, he returns the very jacket Calvin gave him on that humiliating day 2 decades earlier, something Bob had kept all these years. With a grin, the two friends drive off together, ready to take on their new lives as CIA agents.